William, we saw President Donald Trump publicly link progress on the trade talks with the Hong Kong protests. Do you think that these protests could influence US-China trade talks?
Well, it's an interesting question. I don't know that they'll influence the trade talks from a negotiation standpoint. Honestly, it's an issue of national sovereignty, and it's a non-starter. I mean, Hong Kong is quite clearly part of the People's Republic of China. That's not really up for debate. So the US's opinion or the UK's opinion or anybody else's opinion really won't impact. I wouldn't expect China to allow it to influence or serve any kind of a gatekeeping function for the next step in the talks. I know that some of Trump's communication sort of alluded to that fact, that some sort of a peaceful resolution to the Hong Kong protests issues would be sort of a precondition maybe to continuing on with the talks. I would expect that to be a non-starter from a trade negotiation standpoint. There may be regulatory fallout with respect to export controls or things of that nature, but probably not as a negotiating point.
And when I've been speaking to former US officials over the last couple of weeks, they've basically said that the US has nothing to gain from getting involved in these talks, particularly in trade terms. Would you go along with that?
I agree. I agree completely. It's a bottom line for China to the extent that the US thinks that they can influence the Hong Kong outcome by using the trade negotiations as leverage. I would think that would put us even further away, if that's possible at this moment, that would put us even further away from an amicable or easy resolution to the ongoing US-China trade dispute.
You mentioned the regulatory environment and how potentially the Hong Kong protests could feed into a more complex trading environment there. Tell me a bit about that.
Sure. Hong Kong enjoys a special status with the United States. From a trade and economic perspective. And so just as an example of export controls, there are many items that don't require licenses from the United States that incorporate certain US technologies subject to dual use. They don't require licenses when exported to Hong Kong. But if they were exported to mainland China directly, then they would potentially require licenses in some cases, depending on end use and end users. And if Hong Kong were to lose its special status with the United States and be just treated as part of mainland China for trade and economic purposes, then potentially it will change the landscape with respect to the export control issues, as just one example.
And do you feel like in this whole messy situation with Hong Kong and the US-China trade war, that Hong Kong's special status is up for debate?
Well, in the last two annual reports from the U.S. government, where they do an annual review of the relationship with Hong Kong and the United States, and this is pursuant to a 1992 law. And pursuant to the last two annual reports, both the 2018 and the 2019 reports, the U.S. government has basically articulated their concern over growing influence of Beijing in Hong Kong, and they're keeping a close eye on whether or not Hong Kong remains independent and therefore justifying the ongoing independent treatment of Hong Kong. I think probably nothing at the moment that would foster an actual change in that status. Although if there was need for further aggressive or more direct action from the central government to restore law and order, for example, then that could be up for grabs. At the moment, I wouldn't see it, but I think the U.S. government is keeping a close eye on it.
And when you view things through the lens of the Greater Bay Area, which China, of course, has been pushing very strongly, Hong Kong is an integral part of that.
Absolutely.
And that will bring Hong Kong further into the sphere of influence of Beijing. Do you think that integration could be grounds for the US to reconsider Hong Kong's special trading status?
Yes, but not from a political standpoint, from just a mechanical standpoint. One of the policy directives of the Greater Bay Area is to facilitate the free movement of goods within the region and to foster some kind of a specialization amongst the different cities. With Hong Kong, it would be technology R&D would be one of its key value adds to the Greater Bay Area. And with a free movement of goods across all the borders, or we're sort of reducing the customs boundaries, for example, in the Greater Bay Area, then query whether or not the special status of Hong Kong would still be, justifiable from the U.S. perspective, if in fact there's just a sort of a free movement area that's commingling mainland China with Hong Kong from a trade and customs standpoint. So potentially, I would keep a close eye on how the Greater Bay Area impacts it. Of course, it's too far away to see what the implementation regulations will look like and how it will actually be implemented from a practical perspective. But it's definitely possible, but not for politics like with the protest issues, but just for mechanics.
Sure, and in this very fast-moving time, who knows what will the future hold. But William Marshall, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.